everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad mini 3rd generation and see how this particular iPad holds up in 2024. Now, I will tell you, this iPad did bring a couple of things to the table, but it, even back in 2014 when this iPad came out, it really wasn't even that big of a difference coming from its predecessor, the iPad mini 2. So even back then, it probably wasn't worth buying like a crazy amount. But I will tell you, in this day and age, this iPad probably isn't worth buying for the vast majority of people. And I do think that is a very, very big thing to keep in mind. So just that right there, just please keep that in your head. If you want to pick up some iPads that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPad mini 2nd generation, or the 3rd generation, I keep saying 2nd generation. The 3rd generation iPad mini on the front had a 7.9-inch IPS LCD panel on it. Now, the funny thing is that Apple really didn't change this iPad screen for like 4 generations. Year after year after year, it was basically the same exact type of display that they were essentially giving you every single year. So I do think that in and of itself was a very funny thing that they ended up doing here. Again, it wasn't the biggest deal in the world, but at that time, that was a pretty big thing to kind of keep in mind there. So if you were going through and if you were buying some sort of device, you're probably going to experience some sort of a weird, experience just in and of itself. So again, I feel like Apple at that time could have done a little bit of a better job, but the display really isn't that bad. It's a fairly high resolution display. It is a pretty big bezel display too, so it has pretty big top and bottom bezels. But you are getting a Touch ID sensor on the front, which was one of the main differences from this generation of iPad from the other one, from its predecessor. So that in and of itself, I think, was a pretty big thing. If you're getting some sort of iPad, having one of these with a Touch ID sensor and everything was a very cool thing. And once again, I think that in and of itself is a very big thing going on for this particular iPad. So that definitely gets a thumbs up for me here, without a doubt. Now, on the bottom side, you were getting a Lightning port, which is still perfectly fine. Not really too much to complain about there from the Lightning port perspective. You still have a headphone jack here too, which is genuinely very cool. On the back side, you have this completely flat backed, iPad. So this is something that's very cool. You have your Apple logo in the center as well. Then you have your single camera in the top left corner. And once again, I do think this in and of itself is a very, very cool thing going on for this particular iPad, because it does feel great. It doesn't feel bad by any means necessary. But I will tell you, some things that this iPad is lacking that newer iPads have nowadays are things like some sort of ProMotion display. This in and of itself is probably one of its biggest, downsides, I would say. Also, the amount of bezel on this display too. It's a pretty big amount of bezel, and that can kind of be an annoying thing. If you're going through and if you're using this type of iPad, having this type of bezel and having to maneuver around with it all the time can probably be kind of annoying for some people. Another big thing here is the lack of USB-C. There is no USB-C port on this iPad, and if you're going through and buying some sort of device, you probably want it to have some sort of, iPad, some sort of like I/O that's better than Lightning. And this thing, at least it doesn't have a 30-pin connector, but still Lightning is okay for the most part, but it would have been really nice had we had some sort of USB Type-C port on this particular iPad from that particular perspective. So those are just a few things that this iPad is probably lacking. Also maybe like a multi-camera setup on the back, but even that's not that big of a deal. Definitely the biggest thing is definitely those things that I just listed. Now from the price tag standpoint, the funniest thing is this iPad could seem and kind of be revealed as kind of like a good priced iPad because of its very low price. And that's probably one big thing that's sucking a lot of people in, is that particular price tag. And that in and of itself can be a really bad thing, because a lot of people would look at this price, be like, oh my goodness, it's such a cheap iPad, I would just buy it. But that can kind of be a bad thing too, because this iPad kind of has some issues. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying this iPad for a lot of different people. And that price tag can be one of those things that lure a lot of people in. So this in and of itself probably covers up the exterior and the price tag situation of this particular iPad. Now on top of that, on the camera side of things, this iPad is kind of all over the place. So first of all, it has a 5 megapixel standard camera on the back and a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front. Now, the problem I would say with this iPad, first of all, it came out in 2014, so it's a very old iPad. So, I'm going to get that out of the way. It's not supposed to be competing with the iPhones of that time. It's supposed to be just like a cheaper iPad that you could buy that's small, that has a camera. So at that point, the fact that this thing had a camera was very nice and I liked it. But here's the thing. This is a very outdated camera. It is like an iPhone 4 camera probably on this iPad. But the iPhone 4 wasn't even that old in 2014. It was like 3 or 4 years old at the time. Now, that iPhone 4 is like 14 years old and this iPad is 10 years old. So this camera is significantly older and significantly worse than you'd probably expect. And that, once again, in and of itself, is probably going to be one of the biggest downsides going on for this particular iPad. So if you're going through using this type of iPad as at this point, you're probably going to have kind of a weird experience with it for the most part, just because it's not that great of an experience when it comes down to it. So once again, I would hate to recommend a device to people and have it already having, a bad, just a bad experience overall. And that is probably what's going to end up happening for the most part if you end up buying a device like this. So from the camera perspective, that kind of covers it up here. But probably the worst thing going on for this particular iPad is, I'm going to be honest, is probably its software. This device is pretty much done getting software support, and it's been done getting software support for many, many years now. So if you're going through and if you're using this iPad on an everyday basis, you are definitely going to be having a worse experience with this iPad than you'd probably ever expect. And that is probably going to be the biggest problem going on for this particular device. Like if you're going through and if you're owning this type of device for the most part, I mean, it's been outdated with software since iOS 12. We're on iOS 17 right now when we're about to get iOS 18 in June. This is one of the biggest downsides and biggest turnoffs by getting one of these types of iPads. You are missing out on so many features, and you're missing out on so many cool improvements that a lot of different iPads have nowadays. So there isn't really that big of a reason to go and purchase this type of tablet, because you're much better off purchasing a device that is still even like kind of supported with software. So this in and of itself, beyond even the display, beyond the cameras, beyond everything, this I would probably argue is probably one of the worst things going on for this particular device in my personal opinion. And it is going to be probably one of the biggest turnoffs for me personally if I'm going to through and if I'm buying this type of device. It's probably going to be one of the biggest problems, at least I would probably kind of say. So that kind of covers it up there. Now from the performance side of things, also, this iPad had an Apple A7 chip inside with 1 GB of RAM. I don't know what to tell you all, but that type of performance just really isn't that great anymore either. This device has pretty much been outdated with software for a long period of time. And once again, what is the point of even purchasing this iPad at that point when it's already a significantly older iPad when it kind of comes down to it from that side too? So this, once again, in and of itself, is probably going to be one of the bigger downsides of purchasing this type of iPad too, because the performance just really isn't that great. I would tell you for like very, very basic things, like if you just wanted to set this thing off to the side and kind of use that as some sort of display, like it's just like a photo album display or something like that, then maybe this would be okay. But even then, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, mostly because this thing has been outdated with software for such a long period of time. It genuinely just doesn't make any sense to go and buy this thing from that personal opinion. I think in a lot of different ways, it's good and it's great, but for a lot of different people, once again, it just doesn't make any sense to go and buy this iPad, especially from a performance side. So when it kind of comes down to it, I genuinely don't think there's any reason why anybody should be buying an iPad mini 3 in 2020, in 2024 right now. Once again, you are probably much better off purchasing devices that are still kind of supported with software. So think of devices like the iPad 6th generation and above. And even at that, the 6th generation probably isn't going to be supported for that much longer. Even at that point, you're probably better off purchasing devices like the iPad, I'm trying to think, but probably like, devices like the iPad 7th generation, the iPad 9 would be perfect. The iPad 10th generation would be great. Those types of iPads, for the most part, are probably going to be giving you a better experience overall than these other devices like I mentioned before. So in terms of that kind of covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.